Hi everyone, my name's Ramine, and today I'm going to talk to you about mixing methods and theory to explore different types of web activity. The presentation is going to be split up into 3 parts. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background to all of this and where it's come from, where my research is, and how this applies to the web and what the web is, and then how we can take mixed methods and apply it with the web and provide a new way of looking at stuff. And then I'm going to take this example of sort of web activity, what the web is, and apply it to one of the sort of case studies I've been looking at for my work, which is the UK Open Government Data Community. Okay, so the background to the research really builds up upon the framework for web science. So right at the very beginning of this sort of journey that we've had into web science, and the big 3 questions that we've really tried to sort of discover is, what is the web? How is it growing, and what's its future? And by asking these kind of questions at the very beginning, the original, so Berners-Lee et al. Addressed everyone saying that we need interdisciplinary studies. We need to draw upon sort of the sociologies, the humanities, the philosophies. We need to really bring all these together. And they identified it early on as the social technology. And what I mean by this, and what they meant by this, is that it consists of both social and technical phenomena. It is these people, it is these technologies working together, it's policies, it's processes, it's people with agendas, it's even with technologies sort of driving and shaping the way the web is. And then building upon this even more, and sort of really strengthening this case, Halford et al. Released the Manifesto for Web Science in 2010, and I presume quite a lot of you have already read this, and it really talked about the co-constructive nature of the web, and how the web is shaped by both technology and society, and how both are interacting with each other, and how we can't just sort of polarize between the two and say, here's society, here's technology, one affects the other, but in a separate manner. So the research went on to, so how do we explore the web now? How do we currently understand the web? Well, we can look at it in 2 ways, and we could say it in a quantitative understanding. The web is a network of documents, and they're connected by hyperlinks. And if you do this, then you can start categorizing, as Durisberg did, and many others have done. You can say there's different categories of people, or different categories of documents, sorry. And these could be correlated to different types of activities. So he lists talking about shopping or entertainment, and all these different activities on the web. And you can also analyze the web and looking at its structure, looking, like, as we just heard about preferential attachment, the power laws that exist, and how it's scale-free, and all these different sort of the principles of what the web graph is. But the problem with this, it ignores the social practices underneath this. We have these nice documents, and we can do this nice web graph, but we don't really understand the processes that underpin this. We don't consider, well, it's ignored what's actually being said underneath. Why are these documents being created? Why are these links happening here? Then you can do the alternative approach, is looking at sort of the qualitative understanding of the web, and we can say that the web is a set of web practices, that reflect society, and we can look at these practices in small scale, and we can look at it understanding how these specific communities work, and we can do interviews and surveys, and we can really get an underlying sort of understanding of what's going on at the web at this smaller scale. But the problem again with this is that we see typically that it ignores sort of the macro level understanding of the web. We don't really bring in the understanding of what the structures are as well, that sort of, and the technologies that underpin this. So like I say here, there's the technological capabilities and the sort of restraints are also ignored in this type of research. But what the web really is, and coming back to the very beginning of the social technology, is this social technical phenomena. It's this entity that is both social and both constructed through the humans and both constructed through the technologies. And it's this interaction and continuously changing interaction, which is what the web is. And furthermore, the web isn't just this big coherent network. I think we need to start to understand the web in these smaller sets of activities. The web is a network of activities. The web is a network of activities. And these activities are constantly changing and evolving and merging and growing and disappearing. So something like you have your MySpace and it disappears, and then you have Facebook, and these are always changing. And what the web really is, and what the shape of the web is all these different activities coming together. So if we take this understanding, how can we really go forward and say, how can we explore web activity? Well, if the web is a collection of these different activities, we need something that can really understand sort of the micro, sort of the small scale, what's going on, and also the macro, and understand how we can explore both of these together, but by avoiding a sort of a deterministic perspective of the web without suggesting that the technology is driving it or the social is driving it at the same time. And as the Google quote says there's no bad method, just bad research. So, what the mixed method approach is? Well, you've probably heard of mixed methods before or might have come across it. And what I try and take mixed methods is, and this web science approach, is taking the quantitative understanding that we have and understanding all these different structures and looking at the processes and all the different metrics that we can apply to sort of the web graph or any sort of community, as I'll show in a bit. And we can also look at the qualitative understanding of what's actually underpinning these processes, what's underpinning these structures that we see. And I think it's bringing these two together is how we sort of complement each other. So we don't want to just hide one weakness of the qualitative or the quantitative and sort of overlay it with the quantitative or the qualitative. We want to bring these two together and complement each other with them. So if we see a structure emerging, let's really understand what the underlying processes of these structures are. And as I said there, we need to first, if the web is this co-constructive nature, and if it is growing and emerging through these different technologies and humans interacting with each other, we need a process that can really understand it. So I talk here about applied social theory, which we'll hear about in a second. So if we have a look at the one of the case studies that I've been looking at, which is the UK Open Government Data Community. Now, this is a newly formed type of web activity, which is happening both online and offline. And what it is, it's a bunch of, well, it's a very big community of different actors, so from people in the government, civil servants, all the way down to lobbyists and developers, and the academic community, all interested in basically releasing government data in open, non-proprietary formats. So this means anyone can use it. And the overall goals of this community are to sort of improve the transparency of between the government's spending and the government's finances, increase economic wealth, and also citizens' engagement. So we sort of trying to narrow in the gap between the citizen and the government. And this community is very diverse, and it's, as I said, it consists of many different actors within it. And it's still growing and it's still emerging. And this is a really good example of why and how we can look at web activity as these different constructs of the web as being different constructs of web activity. And importantly, one of the characteristics that I found through doing some of the research on this is that the community is very much online, so we can really get a good feel of how the online and offline are sort of help feeding each other. So when I talked about the applied social theory, what this means is we need something that can really understand, as I said, the web as this emerging sort of phenomena. We need something that can really break down and really understand how the web is emerging, how these networks are forming and how they're growing and changing. And one of the theories that I've been working with is, or a concept from a theory of actor network theory, is the process of translation. This is very similar to sort of the ideas that we have in computer science of how software is developed, for instance. So you can do an analogy with that. So the idea is that an idea or any activity, because in actor network theory, any activity is this combination of humans and technologies, and we don't assume anything around this. We don't assume there's these structures that pre-exist. We only care about what's happening at the time and who the actors are involved and how they interact. So we start with these, the idea of process of translation starts with an actor, or with a set of actors who have this idea. So, for instance, in the open government case, they have the idea of releasing this data. They have this idea of people should be releasing data. And their idea here is to how do we interest the people? How do we gain these different actors within it? So by gaining the interest of different actors and using sort of different devices, so this could be from statistical data or prototyping to show people that something is fruitful, that it's actually going to produce some good results. You sort of interest the people and you gain their strengths. And you go on towards, once you gain enough people, you enroll, people are enrolled in this network, and the network emerges and continues to grow. And then once you gain enough support and once you gain enough people and enough actors and the technologies are working right, and technologies and humans are working together, you're in a mobilized state where somebody, basically the network is creating some form of activity and some form of outcome. And the key thing of this is the cyclic nature of these networks, is that it's never stabilized, it's always temporary. So this sort of reflects the idea of going back to what the actual web is. It is this emerging different sets of activities working together, but they're always changing and they're never going to be stable. So today you might have Facebook, tomorrow it might disappear. So I mean, this really comes at the higher level theory of what I'm trying to say about how the web is. So if we take the UK Open Government Data Community, just for instance, and I'll tell you how I did some mixed methods on it, and tried to understand the growth and the emerging properties of it. So the two types of data was, again, as I'm drawing back on it, is the quantitative data, which was a Twitter data set, which looked at all the communications on the data.gov.uk hashtag, and that was from January 2010 to 2011. And then also the data.gov.uk data set, which consists of over 7,400 records. And what this is a portal within the UK. You probably have all heard of it. It's equivalent to the US one, data.gov. And it's where all the government all the data sets around the government have been put into a single portal where you can access, download and use at your own will, ish. And then, so the qualitative data is all about interviewing. So I've been doing a whole number of different interviews, and these consist of people at different levels within the community. So from the very sort of, if you want to say top, from the civil servants and some of the government ministers that are involved with this, all the way down to the lobbyists and the developers, and really trying to get an understanding of what's going on. So as we'll see, we'll bring these two together. But the idea of this is really to look at content as well as context and really put these two together. So we can do the initial analysis, as you've probably seen quite a few times, and we can draw out from the Twitter network that we've got the mentions and retweets graph. And by doing some of the standard statistics or graph metrics on it, we can see that people are more likely to retweet. You see there are hubs of people that are more influential than other, or highly retweeted more than other people. So you get, as we talked about, the power law. You get the sort of the long tail effect, where only a few people are highly retweeted, the rest are sort of talking in the background. And then if you look at the mention network, we see that there's smaller communities of people talking together rather than this whole sort of strongly connected network. And I think there's a few interesting things in there. But again, there's no explanation. We can say these things, but there's no explanation behind what these mean. And this is really crucial. So we see many times sort of the papers coming out saying, we have these nice network structures, and then we leave it as that. But what we want to try and do is push it further. So if we'll keep that in mind. And another way you can look at this is really looking at the communication, so the dynamic structures. So another way people can do it is the temporal graph of how edges or how people are communicating over time. And as you can see, again, we have this really active time around 2011, perhaps corresponding to something. The graph is evolving. So, I mean, if you were taking this and putting it towards the social theory that I was talking about, the process of translation, you would say, oh, great, so suddenly there's activity, people are mobilizing, the network's improving in sort of in its stability, and things are starting to happen, but then it tails off. So you would think, oh, perhaps then that's the end of the network, and we don't know now, so that's it. But what, again, as I said here, we need more to understand this. We really need to know what's underlying all this before we can go and make some sort of assumptions. And then another source of data, so we'll go back to that in a bit. So another source of data we can look at, as I said, we have the open, the data.gov portal, and we can look at how many deposits are being made per time and per day. So if we look at the top graph, it's showing from when the portal was open, or when there was some activity from the 1st of June 2009 all the way up to 2011. And we can see a continuous stream of data being deposited, and we can see there is activity in there. And as this would probably point to is it's a good sign as a healthy repository. But we do also see some fluctuation. We do see some massive spikes, and we don't really know what these are sort of corresponding to. If you look at 2011, it looks like it's sort of dropping off. But again, we don't know the context behind this. We don't know what's going on. So this is sort of something we need to find out. And again, we can look at the data another way. We can say not only what's being deposited or how many times it's been deposited, we can look at what's being deposited by who. And if we look at what's actually being deposited, it's only being deposited by, there's 406 different government departments at the time as I looked at this. It's increased now, I think around 700. But actually, over the entire set of data in there, is only 4% of the departments were producing this data. So again, we need to know the underlying social processes on this. And so just a quick recap on it. So we see that there's these different structures. We see people are highly retweeted. We see these underlying different structures or sort of metrics within it, but we don't really understand what these allude to and what their actually underlying processes in it are. And we can see that the data in those repositories are being released steadily, but again, we don't know the underlying. So you can probably see where this is going. So we need to bring in the qualitative data. We need to really understand what's doing this. Why are these things happening? And it's by using this data and by talking to these people, we need to sort of bring up and talk to them and ask them, you know, if we show them an example of what's going on and we investigate this, by looking at the quantitative data, we can strengthen it by using and complement it by using the qualitative. So we have these 3 different questions, and we'll go through them. So the first one is the structural differences. Why are we seeing people retweeted more than people being mentioned, for instance? And by talking to them, sort of, they came to the common conclusion that everyone says that retweeting is an easier function. Everyone can retweet, and the people that are involved in it, because of this, the people that are involved in these networks aren't necessarily the people that are doing the work within the open data community. And as one of the interviewees said, I've got a couple hundred of retweets and my job is done. And by this, he was saying that I feel a bit sort of, I can do this sort of slacktivism approach to doing the work. I just put something out there, and after that, I feel like I've done my good deed, and I can sort of sit back and relax and do something else. And then we can look at it another way, is also looking at what these structures are. So this is another sort of I'm just trying to bring some examples on here. So the other way we can look at it is, why are these different communities appearing? So as I mentioned, there was a high modularity on the mention networks, and you saw there was sort of small communities of people talking. And what it turns out to be, by the underlying sort of structures within these communities are actually, they're sort of the disparate. There's a developer community that don't usually talk to the governments, civil servants, and then you have the academics talking to another set of people. But what's really, really interesting is not only that the actual people that were highly retweeted were the people doing, quite influential in the offline world as well. So that sort of confirms that in this instance that the highly retweeted were actually the people doing stuff. But the weakly connected nodes between these different communities, that some of them would sort of join into different communities together, were actually the people that were the catalysts to enabling these different data sets or different processes and policies to be produced. So what you would think as being someone that was highly retweeted, they might be influential and have a sort of a high, be well known in the offline community, but actually, not only that, the people that were connecting these communities together were also the ones that were sort of the catalyst to this. And another interesting finding from talking to the interviewees, we saw a fluctuation in communication within the Twitter network, and we saw people talking. There was a large spike in 2011, and what it turned out to be, yes, there was a good amount of communications, but it wasn't necessarily for it was positive remarks, but it was a sort of positive, constructive remarks about what the data was, and there was discussion of, we need to make this data more structured, we need to make this data more complete, and these type of things, just because you see high levels of activity, it doesn't necessarily mean that the activity is for a positive thing or for the growth of the network. So we see these different processes. And as some of the people said here, just a few quotes I quite like, is open data, is just for anyone that's interested in open data, is not a means to an end in itself, but a feature of something else. And I think a crucial part as well is this reflects also the data.gov repository, is that just because there's the release of data, it doesn't mean that the data is being used. And sort of the shared sort of opinion across all the different interviewees that feedback loops are needed. We need to have different metrics and different measures to understand sort of how the data is being released and being used. And they said also a really, I think a nice thing is that it's the quality of the data, not quantity. So we can track all the data and we can say it's growing, but that doesn't necessarily mean the data is useful. So the final thoughts of the open government data community is that its stability is one that you can't just reflect off looking at the actual different activities. It's more than this. And you can't infer the online and offline activities being the same. You need to really investigate this. And this comes back to the final point to this, is that the web is this socio-technical system, this network of people and humans and interacting. And we need to understand it in a way that rather than looking at this big, large-scale network of coherent, like the web graph, we need to break it down, and we need to look at these different web activities. And we need the qualitative and the quantitative to really understanding what's going on this. And the last quote, again, is, the web is a social technology. Thank you very much. Any questions?